everybody, buenas noches. Good evening, everyone. We are really excited to host this evening's webinar. This is the evening and this is the webinar that you are watching either live or you will have the opportunity to view at your own time. We have 3 current independent school educators that we will hear from during the course of our time together to learn more about how they successfully transitioned from higher education, their charter schools and public schools. In a moment, they will introduce themselves. Of course, this is all part of NYSAIS' effort to support candidates for the 34th Annual Job Fair to promote diversity, to be held on Saturday, March 4th. In New York City. If you haven't already pre-registered, we encourage you to pre-register. We want to be sure that you also have an opportunity to view the many webinars that we've prepared to really support you as you get ready to explore independent school, professional teaching, administrative, and opportunities. So with that, I'm going to ask in a moment for each of our panelists to introduce themselves, and I will give them the order. If you are viewing this live, please feel free to pose any questions within the chat, and we will certainly ask them during the course of our time together. So I would love Melissa to begin with your introduction, telling us a little bit about where you work, how long, what type of school or environment did you transition from, and a little bit, you know, as you talk about whether you're a job fair candidate, a previous job fair candidate, something new, or you know, relatively new to the field. So Melissa, I'll ask you to go first, Nelson second, and Takumbo, please go third, and then we'll take it from there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Liz. So my name is Melissa Morales. I'm currently an upper division history teacher at Horace Mann School in the Bronx. I am in my 4th year at my school, and it's actually the first independent school that I've taught at. I transitioned from the teaching at the college level. I taught for 5 years at Fordham University while completing my graduate studies. And when I decided to transition, I was not really sure how to kind of access this job market, and actually I attended the diversity job fair, and that's actually where I found my current position. So I found not only the panels that I attended at the time they were on the day of, but also being in that space with employers directly to be really valuable.
Thank you, Liz. And good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. So my name is Nelson Sanchez. I teach 3rd through 5th grade ethics at the Ethical Culture Fieldston School, the Manhattan campus. I'm also a proud alum of the Ethical Culture Fieldston School, pre-K to 12th grade. This is my 4th year as an ethics teacher at Ethical Culture, and I transitioned from East Harlem Scholars Academy charter school in East Harlem.
Hi, everybody. My name is Takumbo Badunde. I'm an upper school English teacher at Master's School. And I'm in my, what month of the school year this is? This is the 7th month of the school year. Something like that, the 6th month.
That's the never ending from
that
like
long stretch. So yeah, that's how long I've been working for an independent school. I taught for 12 years at 3 different high schools. The majority of which the majority were spent at a high school in Manhattan, and I taught for 5 years at charter public schools in New Jersey. So it's been a really, and actually I'm a product of public schools. So all of my sort of education has come from that sector. So this is very new.
Well, we are thrilled that the three of you are here with varying degrees of exposure and experience. Everyone has a story to share. The questions I'm going to pose, as I mentioned to you in our correspondence prior to this evening's webinar, is really just to provide our participants and those that are viewing with a little bit of insight in terms of your own process. So I would really be curious if you could share a little bit about your professional journey, what made you consider independent schools, and how did you really end up where you are and why? Knowing that, it's not necessarily an intentional or linear path. It may be circuitous. So if you could just share a little bit about your professional journey. Nelson, if you could go first, Takumbo second, and Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Liz. So during undergrad, I began working as a youth counselor at a family shelter. After graduating and working at the shelter for about another year, I began looking at associate teacher programs at independent schools, with ethical and Fieldston always kind of at the back of my mind, just because I have such a strong connection in my life, and just it always felt like my second home. So I applied to several different independent schools, but I felt it would just be most comfortable to work where I went to school if possible. So I focused my efforts there, and I fortunately landed an associate teacher position in first grade at Ethical Culture. So it was a wonderful year, and I realized after that year that I wanted to continue this path in education. So with the push from my sister, I was like, okay, I need to go back to school. And I found this wonderful teaching residency program through Hunter College and East Harlem Scholars Academy. So I did my residency program in 14 months. And I was, again, very fortunate to actually land a position at this charter school teaching middle school PE. So I stayed there for 3 years until I was presented with this opportunity to come back again to Ethical Culture, and here I am now 4 years later in this wonderful role.
That's great. I transitioned, as I said before, from Fordham. So when I was in graduate school, I was intent on getting my PhD in history. And when you do that, or at least when I did, it was very much, it seemed that my only option would be to become a professor. And the benefit of attending graduate school at a smaller program is that I was able to teach my own classes. So I never TA'd, I was always the teacher of record. And what I realized pretty early on was that I actually really loved teaching, and that was really where my passion was, with working with students. And I just realized that I would not find teaching at the college level to be fulfilling. First of all, if I'm at a big university, I would have to write a lot. I would prefer to be in the classroom. And also, even at smaller schools where you do tend to teach more, it's very transactional. You're working with students, one semester at a time. It's very difficult to be in sort of a space that's very communal. So I'm originally from Chicago. We don't have very many independent schools. And so this was like not even a blip on my radar. And I happened to be at a conference for historians, and they had a what was an alternate career paths program, and somebody there was a independent school teacher at Polyprep, and he was a great resource. He offered to let me come to his school for the day and just kind of see what independent schools were about, and that really made all of the difference. And so I think that the idea that these people who work in these schools and the schools themselves tend to be collaborative and allow for these kind of partnerships and mentorships, I think was the first thing that was attractive. And then, as I got into the job market, Horace Mann, particularly with the way that their history department is structured, was very exciting for me. So I feel like I was lucky in that my first year on the job market, I found a school that felt like it was a really good fit.
Melissa got excited. We're both from Chicago, so we have the majority of your panel native Chicagoans. I I actually found my way to teaching really almost by accident. The two charter schools I worked at in Jersey essentially had an easier route to work in than working in the DOE in New York City. My background was in journalism and filmmaking, and I basically I taught and I did every other type of teaching before I taught high school. So I adjuncted, I taught after school, I tutored, I substitute taught. And then it just was clear that you like working with teenagers. So I was able to do an alternate route teaching program in Jersey, which is way less, much less less red tape than it is to get teaching certification in New York City. After 5 years in Jersey, I did figure out to get to the DOE and work at one high school in Manhattan, which I loved. And honestly, I was a casualty of just red tape and bureaucracy. And even though I was a tenured teacher, I don't even know how to explain how it came to that I wasn't able to teach in the city anymore. So I started looking for other possibilities, and the same website that where I found one of the charter schools I worked for in Jersey led me to master's, and I had no picture that would be even on any level the type of place I would want to work at. And when I went to the school, I was like, this is different. Sort of the things that you sort of wish for as a teacher in terms of like smaller class sizes and really a lot of freedom to try different things as a teacher. Like it was just a lot just seemed possible right away. And so it felt like I struggled with it for a few days, and then when I was on the campus, I just said, I would really like to try this. And also teaching in the public sector is profoundly different post-pandemic. And so that was another factor for me. Professionally, I did feel like public schools were going to be a very difficult place. I think they're going to be a very difficult place to be for the next period. Yeah.
Thank you so much. One of the things that you just said, Takumbo, really struck me. You started to draw some of the distinctions or differences from your previous schools to where you currently are, and just some of those challenges. And I was curious if either Melissa or Nelson have anything else to add to sort of helping our audience understand what makes independent schools unique and what makes them different to where you were previously before you came into the role that you're currently in. So either Melissa or Nelson could add, and if you have nothing to add, then that's good. Just let me know.
I think I have a few things in mind. There were a few differences and that I reflect on. I'd just start by saying the ability to currently, like, I would say even better support my classes due to class size. Simply put, I just had, I think, something like 33 or 34 students at a given time, whereas now I have a maximum of maybe 21 or 22. Excuse me. I would also say just schedule-wise, I think it's a bit more manageable. Days are shorter. My days were quite long in East Harlem. The day ended, pretty late. And another thing I would probably add with that is like substitute coverages. With day to day, would have to cover several classes any given day, whereas that's not a thing that I face, thankfully, here at EC. I think there's also like I would say a focus on empowering children to be like responsible for themselves, and like the importance of social emotional learning at ethical culture. Whereas my previous school, it was a different kind of structure. I would use the example of just thinking about transitioning from class to class. We're focusing on straight lines and silent voices. Also, you know, classroom management styles differ a bit. Charter was a little bit more rigid. Another example being like we use reward systems quite frequently, whereas at ethical culture, it's kind of just like a set expectation that the students will do these things. And I think I would say my last thing that comes to mind is like depending on, you know, a few factors such as like geographical location, school demographic and diversity looks different. My previous school in East Harlem had a student population that was predominantly Latinx and Black, and my current school is predominantly white. So those are some of those differences that kind of come to mind right now.
I think for me, it's different coming from a college setting, but something that overlaps, I think, is this idea that you're really a part of a community seems to be something that's coming up. And I think that that's true for me as well. So, you know, teaching in college, because people have such different schedules and because so many people are working on their own projects, their own writing projects, you really don't interact with your colleagues at all sometimes. And it can be a very sort of lonely experience. And I think that the thing that was really exciting for me transitioning to an independent school was not just community with students, but also community with colleagues. And so because we're not tied to a particular curriculum requirement, there's a lot of opportunity for innovation and collaboration on materials. So particularly like in 9th and 10th grade, where we have you know, set classes, history classes that all students have to take, you know, I can bring in, say, my own primary sources, but I'm not working alone. We have a meeting every week where all 10 of us who teach each of those grades really comes together to kind of talk about, you know, what's new and exciting that we want to bring to the table, and also what are the needs of our students, right? What else do we need to address? And so I think that that kind of collaboration and that sense of community really, for me, makes independent schools very different. I teach at a school that is really committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I have had the privilege of being able to be a part of those efforts and to have an administration that listens. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's perfect, but the commitment beyond just having a statement is seen in real time. And I think that the fact that my school is willing to make those kind of investments in sort of long-term changes is also really exciting.
Thanks, Melissa, Nelson, and Takumbo. So one of the things that I think is important, and it just came up in one of the questions in the chat, when we talk about independent schools, what are we talking about? What are these schools? And I just want to take a moment and just briefly provide an overview so that we all have common language. So independent schools are schools that are private. They are not-for-profit elementary, middle, and secondary schools that are governed by a board of trustees. They are able to be funded through tuition, endowment, private gifts, grants, and annual giving. They range in size anywhere from 100 students to several thousand students, depending on the location. They may be day or boarding or both. They begin with instruction in nursery or preschool, and some might end in 8th or 9th grade, while others may continue through high school, and still others may just be high school through PG or a post-grad year, which is essentially a 13th year in high school. Most New York State independent schools end in 12th grade. At the job fair, we are going to have 85 schools, 80 of which are in New York State, 3 in Connecticut, 1 in New Jersey, and 1 in Pennsylvania. And that's new data for all of you and you will have all the information about the schools very close to the job fair. However, you can also start taking a look at what are independent schools by just visiting the NYSAIS website, and that's nysais.org, and just go to about, and you'll learn about the 203 member schools that may be single sex or co-ed operating, as I said, day boarding or some combination. They exist in rural, suburban, or city centers. Most are located in New York City, in Manhattan, with a few in the outer boroughs. There are certainly quite a few schools in Long Island and in Westchester, which is where Tacoma School is located. And then we have a few points north in the capital region, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, and other counties in New York. Generally speaking, they're selective schools offering high quality education, and there's a vast array of athletic offerings, visual and performing arts courses, co-curricular leadership opportunities, etc. And they're all driven by their own philosophy of education, mission, very mission-centered, and really interested in identifying the students that they can serve best, and they get to choose who they employ as teachers to be able to lead the students. Some are schools for students with special needs, particularly learning differences and learning styles, while others are not specifically designated and center any and all forms of differentiation in teaching and learning. So that, I hope, gives you all an overview of what an independent school is. There is a question that was raised, and I was wondering if you could speak to it, Nelson and Tacombo, about what have you noticed in terms of the difference between how the administration and the faculty and staff work together. There's certainly been a history of tensions in public charter settings. How is the experience similar and or different in an independent school setting?
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, that's trying to think, what can I sort of say succinctly about that? Well, I mean, I think that, I hate to say that there's an inherent tension with administrators and faculty, not because of a person necessarily, but I think, or one individual, or any personalities. I just think that it can be tough to. I've experienced this in both public and private. It can be tough if there are ways that administration doesn't remember sort of what it means to, just to be a teacher, or maybe if they never knew. And I'm newer at my school, so it's not totally clear to me who in my administration has been taught or been a long time teacher. One thing, really off the bat, one big difference is, I think there's just in the same ways that the teachers have a little bit more freedom, I find in the private school setting, it looks like the administrators do too. And so it feels like they're a little more accessible than I would say they were in the public school setting. And there seems to be more of an attempt at peerness and more availability. I do think that they're more hands on deck, I think, in a private school setting. So I think of my administrators in previous settings, I think they had the jobs of 12 people, which sort of by definition meant they just couldn't be available in the same way to faculty, to teachers. Whereas at masters, I really find that it's much more spread out. amongst the administrators. I don't look at it as top heavy so much as I just see it as there really are just a number of people who are sort of available and doing different components of administration. I think it's okay to tell this story because it's kind of funny. I didn't get my paycheck, my first paycheck when I worked at Masters. And it ended up being just a glitch with my bank. So it wasn't the school's fault, it was my bank's fault. But when I tell you that sort of the attention to it that I received from administration, like they were on top of it. Whereas if this were DOE, I wouldn't have gotten paid until November. There's just a ton of red tape, and like there's lots of invisible players that you don't have access to. And that sort of was a big moment for me. I mean, it's not about the teaching, but it is about something about the structure.
Thank you so much. Nelson, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think I'll piggyback off that. I would definitely, say while I was super fortunate, I think the admin, my previous admin and my current admin, both have, I've seen go above and beyond in many, many situations. I think in my previous school, it was this idea again of wearing just so many hats and really struggling to find the time to support me or anybody really. It was very challenging, whereas I don't see that in the same way currently. And then I would also add, every independent school is different as well. I'm also very thankful to be part of a school with a union. So I think being unionized and being tenured now, it just provides a different level of support. And so that kind of connects that relationship, I think, a lot better with admin. And we have the opportunity to meet once a month, just as faculty, and discuss our concerns and anything that's coming up, right? And then we can bring those things to admin. And then we have our representatives that then, sit down with them and have these conversations and bring it back. And so it really helps to create the dialogue and make it a more comfortable space for everyone. So, again, very fortunate. Like, I don't know how many other schools have it, but it's an important piece in our relationship with our admin at Ethical Culture.
I'd like to add before I transition to the next question that I think one of the things that was significantly different when I joined an independent school from the previous schools and places that I had worked, there's a very clear understanding and passion for supporting young people as learners. Nelson, I think you said it beautifully, supporting young people to take agency with their voice and be a participant in their learning process and to take responsibility. And for me, I've been fortunate that I've been both in the classroom and in an administrative role, and I have noticed a great deal of, we may disagree on a variety of things. We agree that our students are the priority. We agree that supporting them as learners and independent thinkers is critically important, and we're guided by a school's mission. And so, that I think that's an important piece. Melissa, there's a question that I think you're poised to answer, to the best of your ability. We have a question where it's really about advice that you'd offer candidates transitioning from higher ed, but there's an additional layer to this, and it's that the person who's asking is really interested because they haven't been in a teaching role. If you have any additional advice, they certainly have many, over a decade years worth of experience of working with young people in lots of critically empowering and supportive leadership roles. They just haven't been a teacher in the traditional sense. They have taught in, as a leader leading a program. What advice would you offer candidates transitioning from higher ed, and in particular, somebody who's in that role, on this webinar?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So for me, once I knew that I wanted to teach at an independent school, I actually went and worked as an educator at the Museum of the City of New York, just to kind of gain some sort of classroom experience, even though really what it is leading field trips. And I think that for me, that worked in terms of getting schools to see me as somebody who had been teaching at the college level, but was legitimately interested in working with students. I think especially the way that the hiring situation at colleges and universities are, there's a lot of people who are looking for escape hatches, not necessarily looking, right, to work with kids. And so I think that that was something that I really highlighted in my cover letter. And I also submitted a statement of teaching philosophy to just kind of talk about what my approach would be. And I think that those would be two great places to highlight how you would envision transitioning all of your great work with students into a classroom experience. For me, the letter was helpful to kind of offer the hook, and then the statement of teaching philosophy, which was just about 1 page, I think was really the space where I could share those things about myself, right, that they might not get from my resume. And I found, I ultimately took the position at Horace Mann, but, I found that I was able to interview with a few different schools. And so I think that when you communicate information to schools, through those things, and also honestly being on site at the job fair was a great place to be able to talk to. In some cases, it was a department head who was there for the position. In other cases, it was an administrator from the school. And to be able to sort of talk about why I was really excited to work with high school students, I also think made a difference. So I would say those 3 touch points: the cover letter, a statement of teaching philosophy, and then also in person at job fairs.
Great suggestions to everyone. That cover letter, as Melissa beautifully outlined, really, really can help make a connection with the person who's reading and receiving the introduction that you're putting forth to complement your cover letter, to complement your resume. So really, really take the time and indicate elements of the position that you're applying for and the philosophy of the school, and highlight those elements, because most independent schools, particularly middle and upper school or middle and high schools, do not require teaching certification. And I say middle and upper because depending on the school, there are some elementary or lower schools that have certain expectations that are outlined in terms of teaching certification. So please read the information in the job descriptions and postings very carefully to determine if you already have the certification that is noted and required. And if it's not noted, please include it in your resume anyway. It's an important part of your professional journey and of your professional skill set. So I would certainly include it. But, definitely note that. And if you haven't had, the traditional teaching experience, keep in mind, have you had tutoring opportunities? Melissa, great example of, you led field trips, you were interacting with young people, the age that you would have been working, that you eventually worked with. Have you cared for children? Have you participated in a youth group or some sort of other way to interact with young people? Do you have siblings? Do you coach Little League? There are so many different ways that schools will see a connection and experience that you have had in working with young people that is important and relevant, and often counts towards the number of years of experience when it comes to determining where you're going to fall on salary, particularly if it's a school with a salary scale. They will likely give you credit if they have that information. Along those lines, so, Takumbo and Nelson, you've both transitioned from charter and public schools. And, the audience is really curious. What advice would you offer those that are thinking about transitioning, that you haven't already mentioned, or that I haven't already mentioned, that you would love to provide? Nelson, can you go first?
Sure, absolutely. So I think just off the bat, it's really important to just do your research, right? There are a lot of independent schools with many different values and missions. And really like find the one that aligns best with your wants or your needs. It sounds like simple enough, but they each have their own specific vision for both like student and faculty growth. So I think that's a really big piece, and to my happiness and where I'm at. Also, I think it's important to just ask questions, like visit other classrooms, ask to shadow other teachers, see if you'd like to implement something in your room. And don't be afraid to bring something new or different to like your new school, right? Wherever you go, like bring these experiences. I was like trying to figure out how I was going to translate some of the things that and the values that I learned as a phys ed teacher into this ethics space, right? And then I had to like kind of rewind and be like, oh wait, like well, I went there and I remember all these values. They're kind of just inside me. They live in me. So it's my specific story, but you have to kind of find it and make the connections, like you were saying before. However, you're working with children, there's all these connections to be found. So just bringing that out and making the connection.
I think one of the things that really sold me on my school was I really loved the interview process. I think the interview process can give you a lot of good information about the school. Like, I just felt like these were people who were not trying to grill me. I mean, they were just genuinely interested in me as an educator, me as a person. And I found myself having conversations with them. That just didn't feel rote, and they just didn't feel, I'm sure whatever questions they had, but I'm sure we went off script. And I think similar to what Nelson said, just see what opportunities there are to like get to check out the campus. I got to sit on a class, which was helpful, but actually more helpful was I'd just checked out how do the kids look? How do they seem? Do they look relaxed? Do they look tense? I was curious about how the students of color were looking on campus. Did they look sort of out at sea, or did they look like they were like sort of part of the, like in the mix, central? And I had several black female students come up to me while I was on a tour, and like they looked, I'm sure it's not perfect at our school, but they looked like relaxed and happy. And I think to say something about just switching from a charter school to this setting, I think there's different rigidities, I think, in the charter school system that aren't there in the private school system. And I think, you can be the best educator, and it's easy to absorb some of those rigidities in your teaching. And I think, really just to be open to, having how you think about teaching be challenged. And I feel like I always have like a 1 to 2 year sort of, transition of like really kind of, I can't think of a better word than purging myself, but like really like sort of releasing sort of all of those internalized structures from the previous school system that I've been a part of. So I think there's a lot of interesting. There are a lot of interesting parts about working at I'll speak about my independent school. And there's just been lots of like pleasant surprises. So, it's like be open to being surprised.
Thank you. I love that you spoke about some of the elements of your hiring process. And, candidates are always curious what to expect. And so, let's say the cover letter, if they ask for a statement of teaching philosophy, sometimes referred to as an educational philosophy, if they ask for that Melissa mentioned earlier, and of course your resume, and, the whole goal is to be able to move along in the process and then get the interview. And so I'm curious if Melissa and Nelson, if you could add from your own experience, what can candidates expect from the hiring process? We already know from Tacumbo's response that there's an opportunity to sit in on class and to walk around, and beautiful moments of observation that are happening, and that's giving you a lot of data to think about. What else should candidates consider from the hiring process? Melissa and then Nelson.
Sure. I think just to build on what has already been said about like making sure that the school's a fit. I think that, so normally the process is a phone interview. And then if that goes well, then you get an in-person on-campus interview. And I actually had one successful phone interview and I turned down the in-campus interview because the school was fine. The people were lovely. It just did not feel like I would be the best fit for that school. And I think that's what's very different about independent schools. And this goes back to kind of just becoming familiar with sort of what the different philosophies of each school are and how that might work with you. So if you do end up on the phone interview, I think it is just really an expansion of the conversation of your resume, but it's also a great opportunity for you to learn more about the school as well. And so I think probably one of my pieces of advice would be, if you are transitioning, you're already an educator in some capacity, you know what your passions are, you know what your interests are, maybe where you have not had opportunities to explore things that you are looking forward to, right? You have a sense of what you're looking for. And I think being able to formulate some questions in both the phone and in-person interviews are really important, right? Like questions about sort of what's the culture of the school like. And I think in terms of the in-person interview, every interview that I had required a teaching demo. And I think it's really an opportunity for you to show, how you would prioritize students, because that's really what the teaching demo is about, right? Can you teach, but also can you teach in a way that's really engaging to students? But the rest of that day for me was also super important. So who are the administrators or other faculty that you're being put in front of? Who are you in conversation with? What is the school demonstrating as a priority for them? So I know that's a lot, but I think that I guess my point is that it's about as much about showing who you are as trying to figure out who that school is as well and how you might fit with them.
I think that was very well said, and I'll just kind of jump in on thinking about the interview. I thought, I think about sharing your responsibilities and like your relationships you've had with previous team members is super important. And more specifically, like they will ask you like, what can you bring to the team here, right? And highlighting experiences you've had with previous students that help them like excel academically and emotionally. Definitely want to touch on that. And for demo wise, definitely be prepared to share or have some aspects of DEIJ work, right? Like diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, something in there. It's super important to highlight. And definitely thinking demo wise, like have options for students to maybe more hands-on learners, right? Than visual or like auditory. And lastly, I would definitely highlight, be prepared to answer like any questions that other team members might have, right? Like the collaboration piece is like huge. I think in any space, but I feel like in all interviews I've gone on,
Uh-oh.
We
Nelson.
really
There he is.
think about that collaboration. Yeah.
Great. There's a question, and I'm curious, were your teaching demos with students or adults in the room? I think it depends on the timing of the hiring process. And what I mean by that is if the opportunity becomes available and they have to fill a position over the summer, it's nearly impossible unless there's a camp. And even then, it's unusual to have students in the space. And instead, there will be adults who will be observing and participating. But I'm just curious, did you all have, what was your teaching demo and what do you think the observers were seeking to determine? I know that earlier it was mentioned, you know, a connection to students and an ability to relate. What are some other things that observers are looking to determine during a teaching demo? Tacumbo, let's start with you and then Nelson and then Melissa, if what you wanted to say hasn't been said.
Yeah, I taught the head of the chair of my department. I taught one of his classes for my demo last spring. And there were a couple colleagues from the department who sat in. So I had a combination. I think I'm always sort of interested in how can I bring in, I'm speaking as an English teacher, but something very like high interest, you know, like something that's high interest text, some kind of activity. I tried to, I think people have already alluded to this, really establish rapport with the kids right away. I think especially I feel like I keep on bringing up the pandemic, but I think sort of in this sort of aftermath, you know, where the kids sort of got such a crap deal in so many ways, that any ways that you can communicate empathy in the classroom is just is really important. Yeah, but I definitely lean on like having something that I know that teenagers would be interested in reading. So that's why I leaned.
Thanks. Nelson, anything to add?
We're specifically focusing on the teaching demo, like that. So, oh yeah. So to speak on mine, so I was hired over the summer, kind of last minute. So my, I guess non-traditional in a way. I did a demo lesson with camp students. So they were very excited to be in a classroom instead of doing camp activities. But no, it was a great experience. And actually, I kind of try to use that in a way in my lesson to highlight. But I would say like observers are looking at classroom management really closely, right? Like how are you redirecting using positive reinforcement? All things that are pretty strong in charter, but also really for EC, I think, and probably I would say other progressive institutions or the values, right? In the lesson, is it hitting those touch points, challenging, relevant, inclusive? Is it responsive? I really just try to think about those when I was preparing my lesson, being that that's such a big piece of the school's, you know, mission and values. So yeah, I think that would be what I'd say.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Nelson.
just really quickly, I would just echo what was already said in terms of it's short, right? Like my demo was 45 minutes. They'll be somewhere in that range, right? And the time goes by so quickly. So I know we're saying like there's all these things that you should do, but you know, how do you accomplish that in a really short period of time? And I think as was said, right, the source materials that you're picking in terms of what you're teaching that day go a long way to demonstrating, as was said already, like your commitment, to like diversity, equity, inclusion, and I know at EC justice as well, which I love. And then also that your commitment to different learning styles to different students, right? So trying to bring not just maybe one source that is to be read, but also can you bring in a visual source to supplement that and have students, kind of pull that apart as well? Like, what are the different ways that you can use the materials themselves to really help show sort of who you are and the kind of commitment that you would have to the kids?
Thank you so much. So we have just a few questions. There's the obvious one that people are curious about, and it's around salaries and benefits and doing a comparison between where you previously were and where you currently are. And I'm just going to ask for one of you to sort of briefly provide a context, knowing that every school is different. It's not going to be perfect. It's not an exact science. Actually, Melissa, can you respond to sort of the salaries and benefits question that's come up?
Yeah, so the one thing that I will say is different about than public schools, and I don't know about charter, is that every school has a potentially different pay scale. And so when you're interviewing and you're negotiating, because they are all separate private schools, you really are dealing sort of with that school directly. That being said, knowing what I earn and in comparison with friends that are public school teachers and at other private schools, I think a lot of the salaries are similar. So I don't think, in my experience, there has not been a jump one way or the other. Where I feel really cared for at my school in terms of benefits. We have an excellent benefits program, a really strong retirement benefits program, and also we have excellent funding opportunities for grants for us to continue our learning, for different forms of professional development. And that was something that was not available at the college level. And I know is not available to a lot of my friends and family who are in public school environments. The fact that if I want to read a new book or 3 over the summer, to order those without question and have the school take care of that, to be a member of professional associations so that I can stay up on my craft, like the school reimburses for all of that. And so I think that, what I didn't think about before coming to this environment is in terms of like a salary package or benefits, thinking about all the grants and other learning opportunities that I get here that I did not have access to previously.
Thank you. I also want to add a couple of really specific examples. Independent schools typically have fewer days in session in a school year than public and charter schools. The days, as Nelson mentioned earlier, are typically shorter. When you are either doing the early drop off in the morning for the younger grades, or after school, or additional coaching, or some of the leadership programs like Model UN and Model Congress, and some of the other opportunities to serve as an advisor to a group of students, many schools offer additional compensation. And so there are ways to take a look at fewer days of a school year, fewer students. That means fewer things that you have to grade and review. You start to calculate your time perhaps a little bit differently. And the other thing that I will say is many of our schools provide meals for the educational team, the employees of the school. And it's actually quite good. And, that's one thing that I definitely calculate as part of, the quality of life and the things that you can't really quantify financially. So we have one final question. I'm going to pose it to the 3 of you and ask you to respond succinctly. While you're thinking, I'm going to respond to one question that was posed in the chat. And the question to the 3 of you for you to respond succinctly is, what keeps you where you are? What keeps you in these schools? And whether you've been there for 7 months or, quite a few, 4 years and everything in between and beyond, what keeps you personally in these schools? Because we know there's work to be done everywhere for all of our kids. So that's what I'm going to ask each of you. I'm going to ask to go first, Melissa second, and Nelson to end. The question that I wanted to answer, there was a wondering about the arts, music, theater, dancing, drawing, painting, the visual and performing arts are in schools. Are they just as important as core subjects? And the answer would be yes. And there's so many options for students to be able to explore. Part of it is part of the requirement for them to be able to complete a given grade or a given, divisions set of expectations for a student. There are quite a few options. And it's where so many of our students thrive, where they may not be thriving necessarily in an academic classroom, in the arts, or on an athletic field, or in a leadership position. There's so many different ways that our young people end up learning and growing in beautiful and powerful ways. And I have seen some extraordinary artists on stage and their work in 2- and 3-dimensional, et cetera, that have been pretty extraordinary. And the resources for so many teaching faculty that are also artists in their field is exceptional. So you're not just, someone who's teaching and not practicing your own craft. And I think that's another added layer of excitement as well. So that there was that question. Thank you for that. And one more person squeezed in a question. Are you assigned when you're doing a teaching demo, your topic, or do you get to choose? And the answer is, I've seen both happen. So I'll come back to that in a moment, just in terms of preparing for the job fair as it's coming up. But for now, what keeps you in these schools? Please go in the order I mentioned.
Well, I feel like I'm getting a professional development every single day. Quite honestly, I do feel like I learned something, both from the students, but also just the freedom that's granted me there. And this just feels like a stunningly more sustainable way for me to teach right now.
I would say something similar, which is there's joy every day in learning. And whether that is watching students learn, learning from them, learning from colleagues, I can't overstate sort of the collaborative and intentional sort of nature of like fostering learning. And it's beautiful.
Yeah, just connecting with that, just working with amazing community of teachers that are dedicated to supporting our students and living this mission, and the happiness that I have in teaching the ethical culture mission that was taught to me at a very young age.
I want to thank each of you so much for your time, for sharing your stories, your honesty, and your willingness to offer advice to our audience. I want to pause and do a couple of plugs that I think are really critical. We are doing these webinars in advance of the in-person job fair on Saturday, March 4th, intentionally and on purpose. And what I mean by that is you can view these live or at your own time, and they allow you to prepare and listen and reflect and come in on that Saturday ready to really pursue an exciting new opportunity at one of 85 schools that will be present. Please pre-register. Please watch as many of the webinars as possible. And one in particular that I always think is critical, particularly for those of you that are in public and charter schools. We did a resume webinar a couple of weeks ago, and we gave very specific suggestions and feedback about some of the ways that certifications and experiences with certain initials and programs, how as a public school and charter school teacher, you can make all of that experience, which is a wealth of knowledge, relevant to an independent school audience that may not be familiar with the ways in which in public schools people talk about particular programs or approaches, et cetera. So please, please, please make sure that you watch the resume webinar. It's a great investment of time, as are all of these sessions, to really help and support you to be prepared. As always, you can reach out to job fair at NYSAIS.org. That's JOBFAIR at NYSAIS.org. The email will come to me, Liz Fernandez, and I am happy to respond to you and be able to support you in any way possible in advance of the job fair, on the day of the job fair, and certainly after the job fair. Once again, I want to pause and thank all of you for joining us and for viewing this. I want to thank my colleagues at NYSAIS, especially my colleague George, who was behind the scenes offering tech support. Thank you once again to our panelists, and to everyone. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay hopeful, and I look forward to supporting you in this journey. Have a great evening, everybody.